My name is Chloe Anderson. I'm 29 now, and I once believed that the harshest sound on earth was a door being slammed in your face. It turns out the real winner is a telephone that won't stop ringing after 11 years of total silence. It began with a single missed call, then 5. Soon, my screen was so cluttered with notifications I feared a catastrophe had occurred. In a sense, it had. There were 36 missed calls from my mother. There was no text checking on my safety, no attempt at an apology, just layers of frantic panic. It felt as though the past had finally run out of patience. I stared at her number for a long time, remembering the last time I heard her voice in person. She was standing in our hallway, insisting that I was making a monumental mistake. She didn't use threats or anger. Instead, she wore a confident smile, as if she had already won, and predicted I'd be back to beg for help within a month. My father wouldn't even grant me a glance when he labeled me a disappointment. He slammed the door with such force the entire frame rattled, as if sealing me out could simply delete the version of me they refused to accept. I was 18 when I walked away, carrying nothing but a backpack, a laptop I was paying for in installments, $800 earned from a coffee shop, and a secret plan they didn't think I was capable of making. I never returned. Not after a week and not after a month. I didn't go back when the rent was late or when I was surviving on the cheapest food available. Even when I sat sobbing in bathrooms where no one could hear me, I never went back. I refused to beg. I asked them for nothing. This is why those 36 calls felt like a physical blow. It meant the dynamic had shifted entirely. Whatever was happening in their world was significant enough to crush their arrogance. And their pride was the only thing they had ever protected more fiercely than they protected me. I could already envision the fallout. The guilt-tripping, the forced drama, and the sudden influx of relatives, finding my phone number as if it were their new full-time job. I took a deep breath, placed my phone face down, and asked myself one question before taking action. When the people who discarded you return and demand to be saved, do you rescue them, or do you finally force them to account for their actions? If you've ever been cast out by your own family and forced to build a life from the ground up, you know this feeling. What occurred after I finally returned that call brought my journey full circle in a way I never anticipated. I didn't call her back immediately. It wasn't a game. I simply knew my mother too well. If I answered while she was in a state of peak hysteria, the conversation would become a whirlwind of accusations and demands. Somehow, I would be the one expected to fix a decade of problems in 60 seconds. So, I sat with my cooling coffee, staring at my reflection in the dark phone screen, and let my mind drift back to the first time she decided I didn't belong under her roof. That night wasn't some grand cinematic drama with luggage neatly packed by the exit. It was small and stinging, like a paper cut that refuses to heal. I had informed them that I'd been accepted into an online design program with a portfolio-based scholarship. I wasn't asking for their money or even their permission. I just wanted them to acknowledge me. Instead, my mother looked at me as if I had confessed to a desire to ruin my life. She claimed graphic design was a mere hobby, not a career. My father stated that a traditional college was mandatory, and as long as I lived in their house, I would follow their rules. When I refused to yield, my mother's voice became unnervingly calm, the tone people use when they are certain they hold all the cards. She told me to pack. My father stepped forward, pointed at the door, and branded me a failure before I had even had the chance to try. I remember my hands trembling as I grabbed my laptop and bag. I remember the humiliating clarity of counting my cash on the bed, praying it would be enough to protect me. $800. That was my entire safety net. I walked out without glancing back because I knew that if I did, I might stay. And staying meant spending the rest of my life pretending to be someone else just to earn the kind of love that should have been free. I went straight to my best friend's house. I didn't give her parents the full details at first. I just said things were bad and I needed a place for a few nights. They didn't pry. They saw my expression and the way I flinched at the sound of car doors, and they prepared the couch with a blanket that smelled of laundry detergent and a normal life. Those early days were a blur of pretending to be okay while falling apart in the bathroom at night, running the shower to drown out the sound of my own gasping breath. I continued going to school and smiling at teachers, but every hour I felt a sinking dread in my stomach. My brain kept screaming that I was an 18-year-old with no home and no backup plan. In class, I'd stare at the clock, calculating rent costs and food prices, wondering if my beat-up car had enough gas to keep going. I wasn't just afraid of being poor, I was terrified of proving my mother right. After a week, I went to the guidance office and explained my situation as calmly as I could. The counselor didn't react with pity. She just nodded, asked if I had my documents and a bank account, and checked if I was safe. She connected me with a youth support center. I started learning a new vocabulary: emergency assistance, independent youth services, legal resources. It felt surreal, as if I had been dropped into adulthood without a map and had to learn a new language to survive. I picked up extra shifts at the coffee shop until my feet ached too much to sleep. On weekends, I delivered food through an app because it didn't require an interview, just a car that could last one more month. I spent my breaks sitting in parking lots, eating leftover fries out of a paper bag because it was fast, cheap, and asked nothing of me. Meanwhile, my mother messaged me as if I were the one who had made things ugly. Her first text wasn't about my safety. When you're ready to apologize and do things the right way, you can come home. My father left a voicemail that sounded like he was doing me a favor just by acknowledging my existence. He called me dramatic and told me to stop chasing fantasies. If you come back and agree to business school, we can put this all behind us. The phrase "behind us" made my throat tighten because it meant they wanted to bury the truth as if it never happened. I didn't respond to either of them. It wasn't that I didn't miss having parents. It was that I finally realized their love came with a price tag. Being thrown out was simply the moment I saw the receipt. Graduation arrived sooner than I expected. Walking across that stage felt like committing a crime because no one tells you how hollow a milestone feels when you have no family cheering for you. I spotted my parents in the audience. I saw my mother's polished, fake smile, the one she reserved for public performance. It was meant to signal to everyone else that they were supportive parents. After the ceremony, they tried to approach me as if everything were normal, hoping for a photo op. I didn't give it to them. I slipped away, got into my car, and drove off with my diploma on the seat and my hands shaking on the wheel. That night, I sat on my friend's couch and searched for the cheapest housing available. I eventually rented a tiny room in a shared apartment. The listing looked okay, but the reality involved failing heat and walls that smelled of previous tenants. It didn't matter. It had a door with a lock, and it belonged to me. I moved in with a trash bag of clothes and a laptop, holding onto a promise I made at 18. I'd rather struggle in honesty than live comfortably under someone else's thumb. I thought getting a roof over my head was the hard part, but that was just the start. Survival is one thing, building a life that proves them wrong is another. My first night there, I didn't sleep peacefully. I simply collapsed from the weeks of adrenaline. When I woke up, the reality set in. There was no safety net, no one to call if I couldn't make rent, and no one to blame but myself if I failed. My life became a rigid, exhausting schedule of coffee shop shifts, school, deliveries, and portfolio work. While others my age worried about dorms, I worried if my car would die mid-delivery and destroy my income. I learned that poverty isn't just about money. It's the exhaustion of making 1,000 life-or-death micro-decisions. Do I buy groceries or shampoo? Do I pay for laundry or wear the same hoodie for another week? And through it all, my mother's voice played on a loop in my head, counting down the days until I failed. I kept waiting for a genuine apology from them, something human. It never arrived. Instead, I got handwritten letters that looked sincere but contained the same old demands. Transfer to a real college, pick a stable major, stop wasting time on a hobby. They couldn't conceive of a version of love that didn't involve control. I eventually stopped opening them and threw them in a drawer. By summer, the lack of school structure made life even more grueling. Everything blurred into work. I'd open the coffee shop, rush to deliveries, and fall asleep. I lost weight, and my face took on a sharp, aged look. I hated the mirror because it reminded me I'd been forced to grow up too fast. Yet, I continued building the one thing they couldn't touch: my skills. I spent every spare second on design tutorials and practicing typography. My portfolio was my lifeboat. One slow afternoon at the coffee shop, I was working on a mock logo behind the counter. A regular customer, a woman who always tipped well, noticed my screen. She didn't call it a hobby. "You did that?" I nodded, feeling defensive and waiting for a critique. Instead, she asked to see more. I showed her my portfolio with a racing heart. She scrolled in silence for what felt like an eternity before speaking. "I run a small creative studio. I could use an assistant for freelance projects. It's not full-time, but it's real work." It wasn't a miracle, but it was paid work that had nothing to do with my parents' definition of success. I almost said no out of habit, expecting disappointment, but I forced myself to say yes. That first task was just social media graphics, but when the client loved it, I felt a surge of pride that wasn't borrowed from anyone else. My boss didn't treat me like a charity case. She treated me like a professional with potential. She taught me how to handle clients, accept feedback, and price my time so I wasn't exploited. She corrected my errors without shaming me. She didn't care about a degree. She cared about reliability and hunger. Slowly, my world shifted. I worked fewer hours at the coffee shop. Deliveries became a backup rather than a necessity. I started buying better food and even paid my rent early once. That's when my parents changed their tactics. My mom began texting that she missed me, and my dad left a voicemail suggesting a compromise. He said they could accept community college if it was for business. I laughed out loud at the word compromise. They weren't compromising, they were trying to regain control because I wasn't drowning fast enough. I didn't respond. I kept working and finished my online program. My portfolio was no longer a collection of hobby work. It was a body of work that could open real doors. I didn't know it then, but the balance was tipping. When you become capable of building your own life, the people who want to control you start to panic. By 19, I had a rhythm. It wasn't easy, but it was mine. I was finally out of fight or flight mode. I could eat without rushing and sleep without panic. My mentor, whose name was Alina Vance, gave me high standards rather than empty praise. She taught me how to protect myself with contracts and how to stop apologizing for my value. Having been raised to believe my worth was conditional, I had a reflex to constantly earn my right to exist. Alina helped break that. During this time, I observed other families while doing freelance work. I saw fathers bringing snacks to their kids and mothers expressing unconditional pride. I saw people disagree with respect. It made me realize that my own upbringing wasn't normal. Love in my house had always been a transaction. Follow the plan, get the warmth. The call from my mother came late one evening. I answered out of curiosity. Her voice was soft, but it sounded like a performance. After some fake concern, she got to the point. My father's work wasn't going well, and things were tight. She didn't ask for money directly, but she questioned my stability and my savings. It was the same control, just wearing a different mask. When I didn't give the answers she wanted, the mask slipped. She reminded me that family helps family and suggested that if I came home and did things right, the situation would improve. I didn't explode, I just spoke the truth. "I can't help you. You didn't help me when I needed you." There was a heavy silence before she turned angry. She accused me of holding a grudge and being ungrateful, insisting they had only done what was best. In that moment, I realized they would never take responsibility. After hanging up, I felt a wave of doubt. Was I the villain? I searched for support groups online, needing to find the words for what I had endured. I found a community of people who had been cut off and controlled, and I was being emotionally penalized for failing to live up to my family's rigid expectations. I attended a session once and lingered in the back, telling myself I was merely an observer. However, when a speaker described parents who only offered love as a reward for perfect performance, my chest tightened. They were narrating my own life. That community eventually nudged me toward therapy. Therapy didn't offer a sudden cure. Instead, it introduced a concept I had never been permitted to hold: that setting boundaries isn't an act of malice. Boundaries are a form of self-preservation. At 20, I began practicing the art of saying no without offering a justification. By 21, I had moved into a modest studio apartment, setting up a small desk in the corner where I could track my daily growth. Around that period, I met Ethan at a networking function that Diane essentially forced me to attend, insisting that hiding away isn't the same as recovering. Ethan wasn't swayed by titles, nor did he inquire about my parents' social standing. He wanted to know what moved me. When I finally confided in him about my upbringing, he didn't lecture me on the virtues of forgiveness. He asked a single, transformative question. If a stranger treated you the way they did, would you feel any obligation to keep them in your life? I didn't have an answer then, but I realized the old programming my mother had instilled in me was no longer going to dictate my future. By the time I turned 22, my life appeared solid from the outside. I looked stable enough that people stopped using that fragile, overly careful tone reserved for someone they think might shatter. I could finally breathe without fearing the rug would be pulled out from under me. My career had shifted from random freelance tasks to a steady stream of clients. Deanne began trusting me with high-level projects that demanded real strategy rather than just aesthetic design. I learned how to pitch my visions and defend my creative choices without becoming defensive, taking critiques as a way to improve the work rather than as evidence of my own inadequacy. The strange thing is that once you stop using every ounce of energy just to survive, you start noticing the toxins that have been quietly poisoning you. For me, it was the way my parents still tried to keep their grip on me from a distance. Their rare calls weren't about my well-being, they were about maintaining dominance. My mother would send holiday emails that appeared civil on the surface, but were laced with hidden barbs. She'd mention her prayers for me to come to my senses, or bring up a cousin who had graduated with high honors. I stopped engaging with most of it, not out of malice, but because I realized that responding was like inviting them back into my life. I kept our interactions minimal, a brief note at Christmas or a neutral greeting on Mother's Day. I offered no details and no openings. I was civil, but I remained out of their reach. At 23, I made a choice that felt more daunting than being evicted. I registered my own firm. It wasn't a high-profile launch with parties and an expensive office. It was just a simple LLC, a basic website, and a name I picked because it represented a fresh start. I was done seeking permission. I was no longer living in the shadow of their expectations. I was building a legacy with my own hands, even if it wasn't the kind they respected. Ethan moved in with me that year, marking the first time I shared a home without feeling like I had to earn my right to be there. Our relationship wasn't flawless, but it was grounded in honesty. We discussed finances and goals openly. We talked about my family without pretending the past didn't hurt. He never pressured me to reconcile, nor did he push me to cut them off entirely. He simply reminded me that I was allowed to protect my own peace. That was when my parents' behavior underwent a strange shift. My mother didn't suddenly become kind, and my father didn't become supportive, but their tone changed. The lectures grew shorter, and the blatant judgment softened. Their messages began to sound like genuine interest, though it felt more like they were watching me from a distance. I noticed it when my professional profile started gaining more attention. Whenever I posted a success or a client testimonial, my mother would react to it within hours. There were no comments or congratulations, just a silent acknowledgement. Eventually, she started asking questions that seemed innocent but felt like an interrogation. She wanted to know if my work was stable, if I was an employee or a freelancer, and if I had proper benefits. At first, I gave vague answers because a small part of me still wanted to prove them wrong. But every time I shared a detail, her next message became sharper, as if she were taking inventory of my assets. So I stopped. I put my life on a need-to-know basis, and they didn't need to know anything. During this time, Ethan and I attended an industry event where I met a contact who later referred me to a major client. It was the kind of breakthrough that didn't feel real until the contract was finalized. When the payment finally hit my account and I realized I was truly moving upward, I sat in my car and wept. It wasn't from stress, but from relief. I had built the life they claimed I couldn't. I had done it without begging them for anything. That should have been the end of the story, the part where I moved on and left them in the past. But success often draws back the people who refuse to help you grow. It began with a message from my mother that made my stomach turn. I could sense the forced sweetness before I even read it. She claimed she had been telling everyone about my success and how proud they all were. She wanted to invite Ethan and me over to reconnect. Reconnect was her favorite term when she wanted something without admitting it. I didn't reply immediately. Within 24 hours, my aunt sent a message too, telling me how much it would mean to my parents and reminding me that family is everything. I felt the old surge of guilt, that automatic response telling me I was being cruel for having boundaries. But then I remembered the night I left, the smirk on her face, the slammed door, and the label of failure. No one cared about family being everything when I was 18 and had nowhere to sleep. I sent a polite refusal, claiming I was too busy. Instead of accepting it, my mother posted something online that made my blood run cold. It was an old photo of me at graduation, an image I hadn't seen since the day I walked away. The caption was filled with heart emojis and flowery language about how blessed she was and how she always knew her talented daughter would achieve great things. Strangers commented on what a supportive mother she was. The worst part wasn't the lie, it was how effortlessly she told it, as if my years of struggle were just a minor detail she chose to omit. Ethan saw my expression and asked what was wrong. I showed him the post. He read it carefully and then looked at me. "This isn't pride," he said. "This is positioning." That word was a warning. I knew what followed positioning: leverage. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just her usual way of rewriting reality. But that post opened a floodgate. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years suddenly reached out, acting as if they cared now that they thought I might be useful. They didn't ask how I survived at 18, they just repeated the same lines about how much my parents missed me and how I only had one family. Every message looked like kindness, but I could feel the underlying pressure. I kept my replies brief. I didn't argue because that would mean I was still playing their game. Then, my mother's texts shifted from sentimental to desperate. One day, she was talking about reconnecting. The next, she was demanding that Ethan and I stop by for a quick chat. Not a meal or a visit, an errand. When I didn't respond, my phone exploded. I had 36 missed calls in a single morning. They came one after another like a siren: my mother, my aunt, a cousin, and then my father's number, which I hadn't seen in years. My body reacted with the same panic I felt at 18, racing heart, twisted stomach, a brain looking for an escape. But I wasn't that kid anymore. I was 29 with a business and a partner. Ethan walked into the room and saw the call log. He didn't tell me what to do, he just asked a question. "What do you want to happen next?" That question anchored me. My parents treated me like a tool, Ethan treated me like a human being. I decided to listen to the voicemails rather than call back, wanting to gather facts before getting emotional. My mother's voice was trembling, but it didn't sound like remorse. It sounded like fear. She said they needed me and that it was serious. Then came my aunt's message, dripping with judgment. She called me stubborn and told me it was selfish to turn my back on my parents when they were in trouble. She claimed I owed them. I laughed at that, a dry laugh of pure disbelief. My father's voicemail was the most surprising. He sounded smaller, as if he had lost his breath trying to maintain his pride. He didn't apologize, but he said they were dealing with a situation and told me to call my mother. The person I used to be would have rushed over to stop the chaos, hoping this crisis would finally make them love me. But I recognized the pattern now. They didn't call because they missed me. They called because they needed something they intended to take. I called my cousin, the one who usually stayed out of the drama. After some hesitation, she told me the truth. My father had been laid off months ago. He had lied to everyone, saying it was temporary, but they had fallen deep into debt and were behind on the mortgage. They had received a final notice. They were going to lose the house. That was bad, but what my cousin said next was worse. My mother had posted again. I opened the app with shaking hands. It was a long, emotional post about faith and family sticking together. She didn't name me, but she didn't have to. She wrote about being blessed with a successful daughter who would never let her parents suffer. She spoke as if I were already supporting them, as if my hard-earned money already belonged to her. The comments were full of people praising my good heart and saying I'd do the right thing. It was a trap built on public shame. It made her the victim and me the potential villain. I felt a flash of hot anger, not because they were in trouble, but because they were still trying to control me with guilt, expecting me to clean up a mess they had made. Ethan sat beside me as I read. When I finally put the phone down, he spoke quietly. "Don't respond to the post. Respond to the reality." He reminded me that public fights are just entertainment for others. He told me to decide what I could handle emotionally and financially, and then set boundaries that wouldn't break. So, I got strategic. I gathered old messages, the one where my mother told me I could only come home if I apologized, the voicemail where my father called me a failure. I wasn't being petty, I was seeking clarity. I knew that if I helped, they would claim they deserved it, and if I refused, they would tell the world I was heartless. That night, Ethan and I looked at the numbers. We discussed what I could afford without hurting my business, what kind of help would actually fix the problem, and what conditions would keep me from being sucked back into their cycle. I didn't sleep much, but I was ready for a confrontation I had spent 11 years avoiding. In the morning, the calls started again. I sent one sentence to my mother. "I will meet you. Neutral place, one conversation, my terms." I turned off my phone. For the first time, I wasn't going to show up as the desperate child they had discarded. I was the woman they had underestimated. I chose a coffee shop halfway between our homes, a neutral spot where they couldn't cause a scene without drawing stares. I arrived early to sit with my own thoughts. When my parents walked in, they looked like shadows of their former selves. My father's confidence had vanished, and my mother looked as if she had been practicing her victim face in the mirror. She rushed toward me as if we were close, reaching for my hands and thanking God I was there. I didn't take the bait. I pulled my hands back and waited for them to sit. "Today, I'm going to talk," I said firmly. "And for once, you are going to listen." My mother started to speak, but my father signaled for her to stop. I laid out the past in simple, honest terms. I reminded them of the night I turned 18, the scholarship they ignored, and the way my mother had predicted I'd be back begging within a month. I reminded my father that he had called me a failure as he slammed the door. I told them about the couches I slept on, the double shifts, the nights I cried in private, and the mornings I didn't know how I'd pay rent. I told them I wasn't saying this for an apology, but because they had spent over a decade pretending it never happened. My mother tried to interrupt, claiming they only did what they thought was best. I raised my hand to stop her. "No, you don't get to justify it. You don't get to call it love. You threw me out because I didn't fit your script. That was about control, not parenting." Her face tightened. She tried a different approach, saying they were just scared for me and that family is supposed to help one another. I looked at her with a calm, steady gaze. "Where was that family when I was 18 and sleeping on a stranger's couch?" I asked. "Where was it when I was working until I was shaking just to buy food? You didn't help me then. You waited for me to fail so you could win." My father looked down at the table. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but I knew the difference between a performance and true accountability. I let the silence hang there. Then, I slid my phone across the table, showing her the Instagram post. "Why did you post this?" I asked. She stammered, claiming she was just grateful and that she didn't mean it the way it looked. "You meant it exactly that way," I countered. "You used public pressure because you thought shame would work better than honesty. You turned strangers into weapons because you didn't trust me to say yes without being forced." Ethan was right. This wasn't pride. It was positioning. My mother's voice sharpened, revealing the woman who believed love was a leash. "We're your parents," she snapped. "You can't just let us lose our home. You're successful now. You can afford it." In that moment, everything came full circle. When I was 18, they treated my future like their property. Now, they were treating my success as their inheritance. "I'm going to be very clear," I told them. "This is the last time we do this. I will help you once. Not because I owe you and not because you've earned it. I'm doing it because I choose to close this chapter and stop carrying this weight. My mother let out a breath of relief and began to smile, thinking she had won. I finished my statement. However, this comes with non-negotiable terms. If you reject them, you get nothing from me. The smile instantly vanished from her face. My father finally met my gaze. To start, you are deleting that social media post today, I said firmly. Then, you will issue a public correction that tells the actual truth. You must state clearly that I am not responsible for your debts, that you placed me under immense pressure, and that you are resolving this matter privately. Use your own phrasing, but the message must be unmistakable, I continued. No cryptic remarks and no subtle guilt-tripping. If you ever use my name as a bargaining chip again, our relationship is over. My mother began to object, but my father's posture collapsed. His shoulders slumped as if he finally realized they were out of options. Second, you are downsizing, I added. You will not cling to a house you cannot afford just to save face. You are going to sell it and move somewhere that fits your actual budget, so you can stop living in a state of panicked pretense. Third, if you want any kind of relationship with me moving forward, we are attending family therapy. I'm not looking for a fairy tale family. I'm looking for transparent communication and established boundaries. Finally, you will respect my personal life, my career, my partner, and my choices. You do not get to criticize them, turn our relatives against me, or treat me like a prop for your reputation. If any of those rules are broken, I will cut all ties. No phone calls, no uninvited visits, and no relaying messages through the family. We will communicate via email only, and only if the tone is respectful. A heavy silence filled the cafe after I finished speaking. My mother looked ready to fight back, yet even she could sense the power dynamic had fundamentally shifted. I wasn't pleading for their affection or seeking their understanding. I was setting the terms as an adult. The control she once held over me had evaporated. We don't really have an alternative, do we? My father asked, his voice sounding strained. I looked him straight in the eye. You had your choice when I was 18, I replied. You chose to show me the door. Now I am choosing these boundaries. My mother whispered that it would be humiliating to post a public retraction. I didn't flinch. You didn't care about my dignity when you claimed I'd return to you on my knees, I said. You didn't care about humiliation when you labeled me a failure. You cannot demand respect from the very person you refused to give it to. That statement seemed to hit her harder than anything else because it wasn't a move made in spite, it was simply the truth. After a long silence, my father gave a solemn nod. He didn't offer a full apology or show sudden warmth, but he conceded. Fine, he said. We'll do it. My mother's eyes darted around, likely calculating how she might twist the situation later, but she eventually nodded as well. I opened my banking app and showed them the specific amount I was prepared to cover, the bare minimum required to resolve the immediate crisis. I am paying the lender directly, I clarified. I'm not handing you a blank check to waste. She tried to argue that the situation was more complex, but I cut her off. Then you clearly don't need my assistance. Her mouth shut tight. My father took down the payment information, his hands trembling slightly as he wrote. Then, an unexpected moment occurred. My father cleared his throat and looked at me. You've done well for yourself, he admitted. It's not the path I imagined for you, but you did good. It wasn't a true apology, nor did it erase years of hurt, but it was the first time he had acknowledged my reality without trying to massage it to fit his ego. I remained composed. I didn't reach across the table or pretend everything was fixed. I simply gave a short nod. I know, I replied. And I did know. I'd known it since the first month I covered my own rent with money I earned. I'd known it through every client who trusted me and every moment I realized I didn't need their validation to be real. When we left, Ethan was waiting in the car. He wasn't there to rescue me, but to support me in a way my parents never had. After I recounted what happened, he squeezed my hand and told me how proud he was, not because I helped them, but because I protected myself. By that evening, the original post was gone, replaced by a correction. It was clumsy and clearly written with resentment, but it was there, and the public comments shifted. While some relatives still tried to interfere, I didn't feel that old sense of panic. I sent a single, calm response: "This is a matter between my parents and me. Please respect our privacy." Then I stopped answering. In the following month, they put the house on the market and moved to a smaller place. Therapy proved to be a difficult, frustrating process, as accountability is a foreign concept to people who have spent a lifetime avoiding it. However, the goal wasn't to create a perfect family dynamic. It was to break the cycle. The most significant transformation, however, was within myself. One night, I looked at the old call logs that used to haunt me. Those 36 missed calls felt like ghosts of a past life trying to pull me back. I deleted them one by one, feeling a sense of closure rather than satisfaction. 11 years ago, my mother had smugly predicted I would return as a beggar. I never did. As the circle finally closed, I realized that true victory wasn't watching them struggle. It was discovering that I could offer help without surrendering my dignity. I could be compassionate without being controlled. I could forgive parts of the past without giving anyone permission to hurt me again. This is the lesson I wish I'd learned at 18. You aren't selfish for drawing lines in the sand. You aren't ungrateful for refusing to be manipulated. Any love that requires you to sacrifice your own identity isn't love. It's a contract, and you are allowed to walk away. Build your own life. Do it slowly, honestly, and on your own terms. When the people who doubted you finally come seeking a place in your life, you don't have to beg for their acceptance. You are the one who decides who earns a seat at your table. If you've ever had to set hard boundaries with your family, I'd love to know how you handled it. Did it bring you guilt, or did you feel free? Thank you for listening. Please note that all stories on this channel are entirely fictional and are designed to provide educational insights, useful knowledge, and positive values. This narrative highlights how resilience and healthy boundaries can redefine a person's life. It serves as a reminder that real growth comes from learning from pain, guarding your self-worth, and building a future that belongs to you alone.